I receive several sailing magazines a month pertaining to sailboat racing. As many of you know, that's my avocation, and it's what keeps me from even higher amounts of counseling bills. But this has been a recreational passion of mine for a long time. But each month I get these magazine articles, and they're written by the brightest and the best sailboat racers in the world, and the articles are usually about how to finish in front of the pack, how to bring home the hardware, which means the trophies, how to win more races. Recently, I read an issue that had about 6 of these kinds of articles, the how to win races kind of articles in it, and I counted up all of the recommendations of what these experts said you had to do right to win sailboat races, and there were like 35 recommendations in just that one magazine, 6 articles. And I put the issue down and I thought, you know, a list that long doesn't help me much. On my way out to the race course, I'm not going to think 35 different thoughts and have them in my mind. It's probably not going to help me win that. It's just too overwhelming. What I would like is someone to say, here are like 3 or 4 recommendations, the ones that are super important, and if you do these, you'll vastly improve. You'll win a lot more races, because on my way out to the race course, if I just have 3 or 4 of those nuggets of advice in my head, I can probably implement those, and maybe it'll improve my racing some. But I can't do like 35 things in my mind. But you know, it'd be very hard for a sailboat racer, an expert, to reduce the number of recommendations down to just 3 or 4. Because expert sailboat racing people, they know how complicated and multifaceted sailboat racing is, and to boil 35 pointers down to 3 or 4, well, that feels like you're being simplistic, maybe reductionary, you're being unfair to the complexity of the sport. Sometimes the same kind of thought process happens to me when I think about leadership. This summer, I read Michael Feiner's book on leadership. It contains 50 facets of leadership. And he says if you master these 50 facets, as you lead your people, you know, your organization is really going to do well. And I thought, 50? Wow, that's a little intimidating. A couple years ago, John Maxwell did the 21 irrefutable laws of leadership. Sold millions of copies. Thank God he whittled the list from 50 down to 21. Jack Welch just came out with a new book called Winning, and he boils a list of 21 down to 8. 8 basics. If you pay attention to these leadership basics, you'll grow a great organization. But that had to be hard, just boiling it down to 8. So imagine my glee a couple months ago when Jim Mayato and Steve Bell pulled me aside and they said, we want you to give the final message at the summit this year. We want it to be a message titled, These Things We Must Do, and we want you to send church leaders back to their individual congregations with marching orders that they can keep straight in their heads. A list of orders short enough that they can concentrate on just a few leadership basics, and that if they do these well, their churches will benefit greatly. And I said, well, how many of these basics did you have in mind? And they said, we would like you to boil it down to 4. And I said, that should be no problem at all. So what I did the next few months is I walked around and I kept saying, if I had to choose 4, if I had to say, above all things, do these 4 facets of leadership, do these 4 recommendations when you get back to your church, and I think these will be the 4 that'll make the difference more than any other 4. Well, I've been trying to think, what would those 4 be? I'll give you a little insight to what I had to do to reduce a bigger list down to 4. I imagined myself on my deathbed with Jim Mayato and Steve Bell sitting next to me with a microphone. And the doctor comes into the room and says, the guy only has 4 sentences left in him. And Jimmy and Steve say, Bill, don't waste words saying goodbye to your family. Don't quote scriptures or sing a final song to God. Give us the 4 points and then die. I just kind of pretended that to increase the pressure in my life, to try to really boil it down and to say, if I could just say, please pay attention to these 4 things. Do these things. And so, from my, make-believe deathbed, here comes the first of my last gasp sentences about leadership if I only had 4 sentences left in me. Here's the first one. Keep the vision clear. Keep the vision clear. Proverbs 29:18, you all know it. It says, without a vision, the people what? Okay, let's say it together, that whole verse. Without a vision, the people perish. Okay. For just a moment, I want you to think about the last 2 words of that verse, the people perish part. Usually when this verse is quoted, we always think about the vision part. I want to know what it means when it says without a vision, people perish. What does that mean? It can't mean that people die physically, because I grew up in a vision-free, vision-impaired church the first 20 years of my life. Now, it was awful, it was painful, but I lived. In this context, the phrase, the people perish, is referring to the consequences in the hearts and lives of followers or church members where there is no clear, white-hot, Christ-honoring vision. What does people perish mean? It means their shoulders sag, their sense of excitement diminishes, their hopes fade, their dreams die. Or as Ben Zander taught us in the summit a couple years ago, no one has shining eyes anymore. Pulse rates go down. In a church, when people start perishing for lack of a vision, some ugly things can happen, and they can happen quite quickly. Within months of a vision getting fuzzy, you can watch perishing set into most churches. Church members get restless and irritable. They behave chaotically sometimes and become unloving. Some will start to turn inward and want all the resources of the church to be focused on the comfort and the convenience of the already convinced. Little special interest group start warring for the limited resources of a church. Some in the church will get excited about parachurch ministries which have clear visions, and they'll want to bend the whole focus of the church that way. Still others, and in my opinion, the vast majority, they'll simply stop taking church seriously. They know that their church isn't doing anything or going anywhere, so they'll allow the affections of their hearts to be captured by their vocational drives, by their pursuit of money or power, their recreational passion. Others will just order takeout food and rent movies 5 nights a week while their spiritual gifts atrophy, their minds get dull, their wills get weak, and their dreams of doing something great for God someday just die. Leaders, you have to understand what happens to God's sons and daughters if they're in a church long enough without a compelling Christ-honoring vision. They perish. They perish on the inside a little more each week, each month, each year, until, for all intents and purposes, they're as good as dead with regard to things of God. I've seen this happen. I've seen entire congregations just give up on believing that their leaders are ever going to paint a picture of the future that will give them passion about something. They give up believing that their pastor has the passion or the guts to rally them around a riveting, Christ-honoring cause. So they gather on Sundays, they mouth the words to some worship songs, they shake their heads in assent to another mindless, harmless sermon, and they drive away wondering why they bother with the whole thing. They just perish. I'll never forget a conversation I had with a church-going business guy. He had a huge heart for God at one time, but his heart for God was shrinking. He was just in total frustration, and his frustration was leaking out all over the place. And he pulled me aside at a conference, and he said, "Bill, would you meet with my pastor?" I said, "What for?" And he said, "To tell him to put a target on a wall. Any target on any wall. People like me just need some direction, some reason, any reason for staying in this game. I'm dying here," he said. "I'm dying here." And he was. He was perishing for lack of a vision. And there are millions of Christ-loving, good-hearted people who dream of God using them someday to make a difference. But they don't get to do it because there's no compelling vision in their church. So leaders, we have to deliver on this one. I'd say it from my deathbed. I'll say it till my dying day. We've got to keep the vision clear. We have to discern the holy discontent in us. We've got to feed that till the internal firestorm is raging enough that it has to give way to a vision. And then we've got to talk about that vision with our colleagues and elders and deacons and other people in senior leadership. And we've got to transmit that vision so that it's shared and shaped by our fellow leaders until it burns in them as well. And then there will come that day when the vision goes public to the whole church. And great leaders prepare for that moment like prize fighters preparing for a heavyweight fight. Great leaders attend to every single detail with regard to a vision talk. They write it and rewrite it. They make sure that the pictures in the talk are vivid and filled with emotion. They spend hours looking for the perfect scriptural supports, for the compelling, unforgettable illustrations. They practice giving the talk again and again and again, like a prize fighter shadow boxes in an empty ring, because they know it's at stake. And when the vision talk is finally delivered to the congregation, the leader puts every last ounce of energy and emotion into it, knowing full well that in many regards, this is the most important talk of the year. Leaders can tell when a Christ-honoring vision is starting to take root in the church. Leaders can tell that as they give it. They watch people's eyes get bigger, their posture get straighter, the smiles get wider. They watch people's faith get stretched and the sense of commitment deepening in them. You can just see it. It's true, without a vision, the people perish. But when a vision lands in the hearts of people in a church, people start to soar. Some of the vision talks I've given over the years, when I finish the vision talks, people will stand in long lines and they'll come down. Sometimes people will grab me by the shoulders and they'll say, just sign me up for that. Count me in for that. Or as one person said to me after a vision talk, they're going to have to drag me out of here in a box. I will give my life and my dying breath to that vision. Leaders, I'll say it again. We have to deliver on this clarity of vision thing. We owe it to our people. They'll perish without it. We owe it to God. We owe it to the kingdom. We owe it to our broken world. And I'm naive enough to still dream of the day when every single local church on planet Earth is pulsating with excitement and determination to carry out its Christ-honoring vision. When people aren't perishing in pews, they're pulsating with energy and they're soaring in their spirits because there's a vision in the church worth investing in and praying for and giving toward and dying for if need be. I still dream of the day when every church member of every church is so fired up about the vision of their local church that they spend the best hours of their day just daydreaming about what more they could do to help their church achieve the vision for the glory of the one whose name they bear. What a day that will be. And I can imagine such a day because I believe leaders like you are responsive to God. And I believe leaders like you understand that vision will always be the most potent offensive weapon in the leader's arsenal. And when you connect it to that holy discontent inside of you and you feed it, it will burn white hot and other people will be singed by it and your church will soar because of it. So I will say one last time, leaders, we have to deliver on this. Keep the vision clear. My second deathbed whisper would be, get the people engaged. Get the people engaged. The verse I want to have you learn in this regard is Nehemiah 4, verse 6. It simply says this, and all the people worked with all their hearts. Repeat after me, and all the people... No, do it my way. And all the people worked with all their hearts. Now just imagine that for a moment. Every single person you're leading, every single person in the church is working with all their hearts. What we have to understand here is the difference between someone who passively agrees or gives mental assent to an exciting vision and someone who buys in and becomes an owning stakeholder in that vision. Someone who begins to feel as much responsibility for vision achievement as you, the leader, feels. Nehemiah experienced this. I mean, he's the one who rebuilt the walls, and of whom it was said of his people, they worked with all their hearts. One of the most fascinating books I read this summer was a book by Michael Abrashoff titled, It's Your Ship. Michael was a ship captain in the U.S. Navy, and he was promoted to take the command of a guided missile destroyer ship, but the crew on that particular ship was known far and wide for its poor performance and even poorer morale. They were disunified and dispirited. They were underperforming. In less than 2 years, Abrashoff turned that ship and crew to the most unified, highest performing ship in the U.S. Navy. He had the lowest turnover by the time he actually was relieved of command. It was just an amazing story. If I could summarize how he did this turnaround with that ship, he did it through one basic principle. He did it through creating ownership. His standard line with his crew was, it's your ship. It's not my ship, it's your ship. It's yours to endure if you want to just endure it. It's yours to be miserable on. It's yours to be embarrassed about. It's yours to resign from if you want to quit from the Navy. Or it's yours to improve. It's yours to enjoy serving on. It's yours to be proud of. How do you want your ship? And he explains in that book, very compellingly, that when the crew believed that their opinions mattered, that their input was wanted, that the captain would listen to them, that their contributions were valued, that they could plan a different future together and move toward it together, they started pulling together and they started to work with all their hearts. Friends, great leaders understand the power of ownership. Great leaders know that full-hearted engagement of the team only comes when every member of the team feels like they have skin in the game, that their ideas matter, their contribution matters, that their thoughts and opinions are valued, that their voice will be listened to, that they can speak into the future of the organization. Without all of that, people will disengage. I've talked to you before in past summits about my dad, one of the most colorful, courageous people, leaders I've ever known. He built his own company over a 35-year period of time. He bought and sold businesses, fantastic leader in every arena of his life, except in the church he spent his whole life attending. He never engaged in that church. Pastors would come and go about every 4 years in our denomination, and I would secretly hope, as I was a kid, I would secretly hope that just one of these pastors, just one time, would engage my dad, involve my dad, include him in anything of substance, maybe turn him into a stakeholder of some sort. But it never happened. And he went to his grave without ever feeling the thrill of being a part of a Kingdom Dream team, without ever feeling the thrill of doing great stuff in a local church. And if I think about that too long, I bust out bawling every time. What a terrible waste. And let me be painstakingly practical about this ownership thing, about this how to engage the people. You might want to write this down because I created a little list that I think might be helpful for some of you who would like to see engagement go up in your church or like to see ownership deepen in your church. For people like my dad to get on board with a pastor or leaders in a local church, several things would have had to have happened. Here's the little list. First, a guy like my dad would have needed to sense that the pastor of that church was totally committed to the future of that church, and I mean totally committed. My dad was a high commitment guy. He would never sign on with a low commitment leader. Pastors, I'll say it to you again. I don't mean to be disrespectful. I don't mean to be talking down to anyone. But if you're not in the pastorate because you have a burning vision to see God do something in your church, if you're just putting in time, if you're a hireling, get out. Just get out. Spare all of us. Because the kingdom cannot proceed with leaders like that. The only kind of leaders that people really want to follow are people who have something burning inside of them. People who have something to lay down their life for. My dad would have never followed a half-hearted kind of peacekeeping, neutral individual. My dad would have only responded to someone who had that firestorm, that something churning inside. We had a couple hundred of our volunteers go help a habitat project a couple weeks ago. And you know who fired them up? Our former president, Jimmy Carter, who's in his 80s and who still has this firestorm burning in him about the fact that too many people in the United States don't have adequate shelter. So here's this guy who has all the money and all the power and all the comforts that he could ever come his way. And here is Jimmy Carter out in the blazing sun, pounding nails and sawing wood. And he's just showing that he's got in his gut this dream to provide housing. And people follow him by the tens of thousands. Pastors, the kinds of leaders you want to track around you will never follow you until they see what's burning inside of you, until they realize, hey, my goodness, this guy's going to go kill himself doing it alone if I don't help him. I mean it, friends. That's what draws people around you, is they go, it's almost like a pity thing. They go, oh, my goodness. He'll die without my help, so I'll help him. Well, that's what my dad would have had to see. Some pastor who was set afire by what God had created in his holy discontentment, my dad would have followed someone like that. Secondly, my dad would have never signed up for a small dream, for an insignificant endeavor, a low risk or a low thrill vision. My dad was a high challenge guy. He bought a sailboat in Dublin, Ireland, and sailed it across the Atlantic Ocean through storms and hurricanes. He was a world traveling business person, a private pilot. If he could have bought a ticket into space, he would have gone in a heartbeat. He would never have had his imagination caught by a safe, sanitized, low risk church vision. It'd have to be dangerous for him to want to be involved. And that's true with so many high-capacity people that we're trying to draw into church work these days. They will not sign up for tidy little, easily achievable missions. They know they're not needed. They need a dangerous one, and we have to provide it. Thirdly, my dad would have never stepped forward just kind of voluntarily to offer his services. By that I mean, he was not the type to raise his hand in a service. He was not the type to go stand by a little card table in the lobby and sign up for a little committee. That's not how he was wired up, and a lot of people in your church are not wired up this way either. My dad had so many people in his world asking for his time that if he was ever going to be involved in a local church, he would have needed to be asked, probably more than once, and probably by the senior pastor or executive pastor or a very senior leader in the church. Leaders respond to other leaders, and he would have had to be asked. And I say this again, you've heard me say it in so many summits. Leaders, a lot of what we do is about the power of the ask. Don't say someone's no for them. Go to people who you know are busy, who you know are high capacity. Look them right in the eye and say, I need your help. You can bring something to this church. I know you can, and I challenge you to do so. And then if they say no, that's between them and God, but don't say they're no for them. Fourth, for a guy like my dad to get involved in a local church, he would have had to have a crystal clear idea of what he was being asked to do. And in addition to that, he would have needed some running room to be able to pull it off. He would have needed a little latitude. If someone would have checked over his shoulder every 15 minutes, he would have bailed. He needed an assignment, and he needed the latitude to do it. Fifth, for someone like my dad to get involved in local church work as a volunteer, he would have needed feedback and evaluation and an occasional way to go, you're on the right track, or a, hey, by the way, Mr. Hybels, could you move like the course over 15 degrees, and then that would be great, but he'd need a little feedback now and then. And then finally, sixth, he would have needed what every volunteer in every church needs, the occasional reminder that what the volunteer is doing really, really matters, and it matters for all eternity. I told you years ago about the time when a man from Willow Creek who has the gift of giving and was giving hundreds of thousands of dollars, and he was living on as little as he could live, making as much money as he could make so that he could release as many resources to our church as he possibly could. And he called me for lunch one day, and I went and I sat down at the table, and I wondered if everything was all right. And he said, Bill, everything's all right, but just, you know, I have to tell you something straight up. My accountant thinks I'm crazy, and my business partner thinks I'm crazy, my lawyer thinks I'm crazy. I just need you, maybe once a year, to sit across the table from me and tell me I'm not crazy. That's all I need. And that's what every volunteer needs. Volunteers who have 50-hour-a-week jobs, and who come home and still have to wash the car and mow the lawn and tend to the kids and all that. Then they come over to the church and they work until midnight, and they're driving home in our situation in a blinding snowstorm for 30 minutes, and they're just, like dodging snowdrifts going, I must be crazy. What am I doing this for? Why am I taking all this so seriously? And Jesus used to turn to his followers every once in a while, and he would say, you're not crazy for following me, for giving your life to what you're giving it to. You are not crazy. Someday, you're going to awaken in a new reality, and you'll look back over your life, and you'll be grateful for every single hour that you gave yourself to the grander vision. You're not crazy. I might just say to all of you who have attended the summit, you are not crazy. A lot of people think you are. You are not crazy, okay? Now, if a pastor or staff members, senior staff members of a church would have offered those kinds of things to my dad, they would have got a franchise player in the local church. He would have given his guts. He would have given his best energies and creativity, and he had a lot of money to give, and he would have given that joyfully. And I believe he probably would have pulled half a dozen of his business buddies into the challenge with him, because all high-capacity people like to pull others into the challenge with them. But instead, because those things didn't happen, he warmed a pew his entire adult life, dropped dead from a massive heart attack at the age I am right now. And I'll say it again, what a god-awful waste. And there's millions of people like that. And they're in your churches. And I'd say it from my deathbed, I'll say it till my dying day. Get those people engaged. Challenge them. Go out to lunch with them. Get to know their story. Pray for them. Love them. We talked to you about the Living Beyond Myself series that we did, where for 4 weeks we just took a month out of the church calendar and we went after guys like my dad for 4 solid weeks. And at the end, we put the big challenge out, and 2,000 people responded to that challenge and joined our volunteer ranks. And this kind of thing is available to all of you. But if you do business the same way you've always done it, you're going to get the kind of results you've been getting. And you have to try something new to engage more people in your church. Do something. Engage the people. My third deathbed recommendation would be make your gatherings memorable. Make your gatherings memorable. Another way of saying it, create great church services. How can I say it more plainly? Work so hard to make your gatherings memorable that your people wouldn't think of missing them, and that they regularly kick themselves around the block for not inviting more friends with them. I think back, we're about at our 30-year anniversary here at Willow. It's coming up in a couple months. When I went door to door every day, 6 days a week for 6 weeks around this community, and I asked, hey, if you don't go to church, why don't you go? Do you remember what the top reason was? The services bore me to death. Why would I go and endure that? Why would I subject myself to that? The services are boring and irrelevant to my life. Things haven't changed, friends. The competition has just gone up, actually. Acts 2, verse 43 is the verse I want you to memorize here. It simply says, and everyone kept feeling a sense of awe. Say it with me. And everyone kept feeling a sense of awe. That's what you want in your services, that everyone keeps feeling a sense of awe. Not, oh, I can't stand this. Oh, she's still singing. Oh, is that guy still preaching? But awe, as in holy, transcendent moments where the awareness of the presence of God is palpable. I was in a church service in the heart of London a few months back, and a pastor walked up to the front in the middle of the service, walked up to the front of the stage, and he asked all the school teachers to stand and all the people who were in the healthcare industry who were a part of their church, doctors and nurses and teachers, essentially he asked them to stand. And for the next 2 or 3 minutes, in this wonderfully pastoral way, he said words of affirmation to them while a person was playing on the keyboard. And he said things like this to these people who were standing: you shape our children's minds. You care for our bodies when accidents and injuries befall us. What you do is noble. What you do has dignity. And we all know that it's difficult from time to time, so we're going to affirm you now, and we're going to lift you up in prayer. And they prayed, and oh, did they pour out prayers on those doctors and nurses and teachers. And afterward, everyone in the church gave them a sustained standing ovation, and there was not a dry eye in that place, including mine. And I sat there and I thought, this is awesome. This is awesome. The church encouraging doctors and nurses and teachers. It's awesome. Not long ago, I was in the little multicultural church that I attend in the summertime. Multicultural because I'm there. And I threatened him with that too. But I had had a tough week here at Willow. And I was sitting in my same spot, that I always sit in. And I was sitting there, and an older woman got up and walked to this cheap little organ over in the corner. And she started singing that old spiritual song, it's me, oh Lord, standing in the need of prayer. Not my brother, not my sister, but it's me, oh Lord, standing in the need of prayer. And there wasn't a single stage light. There were no cameras, no big screens, no orange cones in the parking lot, no two-way radios all over the place. And that gal threw herself into that song. She sang it from her toes. She was wailing out to God. And partway through that song, the Spirit got a hold of me. I put my head down on the back of the pew in front of me, and I just sang along with her. Oh, God, it's me, standing in the need of prayer. And I started praying up a storm. God, I need some burdens lifted. I need some wounds healed up from this week. I need some assurances that I'm not in this thing alone. Strangest thing, an awesome thing happened. God met me. Third row from the back, on the end, face down on the pew. God met me there. And He touched me, and some burdens were lifted. And some promises were made that were important to me. And it was awesome for me. Maybe it's just me, but the older I get, the more aware I've become that when people come to our gatherings, when they come to church nowadays, deep down they're hoping against hope that God will touch their life. They want that more than anything else. They're hoping that God will meet them, that the Spirit will whisper to them. They're hoping that something awe-inspiring will happen. And I, for one, think that pastors and programming people should work and pray and brainstorm overtime, if need be, to increase the likelihood that these transcendent moments might occur. In other words, I think we ought to work really, really hard to make our services as memorable and as potentially awesome as we possibly can. Some time ago, I was meeting with the programming team that helps me with the services that I speak at here at Willow, and we were doing a little brainstorming, and I said, right off the top of my head, I said, you know what I think people are saying these days when they walk through those doors here in our auditorium? I think people are saying, move me, scare me, inspire me, convict me, stir me, anger me, surprise me, ignite me, thrill me, do something to me. Just don't leave me the way you found me when I walked through those doors. Now, again, I was just kind of running off at the mouth, but our producer, Corinne Ferguson, caught those words, unbeknownst to me, and she wrote them down, and she put them on cards, and now when we plan our services, we go to the room where some of these cards are up, and when we plan services now, we just remember that people want to be moved or scared or inspired or convicted or stirred or angered. They just want something. They want something awesome to happen. They don't want services as usual. A few months ago, my programming team was given the opportunity to plan Father's Day weekend. And I'm not saying anything disparaging here, just an observation. I went down to the planning room, and there were quite a few yawns and people who were like slumped over their chairs. And I said, hey, we have the opportunity now to plan Father's Day that's coming up in a few weeks. And the sense in the room was, well, what did we do last year, And so, just to spice things up a little bit, I said, hey, you want to know the truth, gang? Dads hate Father's Day. Dads don't like to go to Father's Day services. Did you know that? If the truth were known, they'd all like to take a pass if their wives would let them, but their wives don't let them. One of the people on the creative team said, you know, I think Bill's telling the truth. I think men would rather sleep in or play golf or do anything rather than sitting in a church building and getting beat up for not being a good enough dad. So someone said, well, is that different from Mother's Day? Oh yeah, Mother's Day, all you have to do is get sentimental, give them a flower, they love it. So I thought I'd exercise a little leadership, and I said, okay, gang, here's the deal. For the next 30 minutes, I want to call the best out of you. I want your best thinking, your best brainstorming, outside the box ideas, but let's go with this for 30 minutes and ask God to give us a new idea about Father's Day. Let's think free, as Steve Sample said at the summit last year. Well, I said, what do men really love? How do we build bridges to men? Where are men's heads at? And within 30 minutes, we came up with a fantastic new concept. We even gave it a logo. I think it's going to appear here. Dad Fest, we called it. Now look at that logo there, huh? It's cool, isn't it? Now here's what we said. What do dads love? Well, dads tend to like cars and motorcycles and stuff. So right on our stage here, we put some cars out on the stage. Yeah, that's where I preach. See that? And what else do men love? Well, they love lazy boy chairs. So what we did, we found out which dads had the most kids or the most grandkids. Just Gene Apple led a little thing, and we invited men to come up and watch the whole service by recliner with a little remote that they had. And we had a Harley Davidson flying right over my head, suspended from the rafters. Yeah, cool, huh? And guys never looked at me. You know, they're just looking. It was awesome for them. But we connected this we have a cars ministry at our church where people who don't absolutely have to have the trade-in value of their car donate their car to our cars ministries, and then volunteers fix the cars, and we give them to single moms, and we give hundreds of cars away this way. And we had like a car show in conjunction with our cars ministry and free food and all of that, and it was a ball. And we got so much feedback from dads saying, you're going to do it again next year. I can't wait till Father's Day next year. Now, the point that I'm making in all of this, it is so easy in church work where weekends roll around with amazing regularity. To just say, what'd we do last year? How can we fill the page? How can we just sort of skim by this one this week or so? And I'm telling you, friends, I would say it from my deathbed. I'll say it till my dying day. You got to make your meetings memorable. You got to put the work in them, the thought process. This past year, Gene Apple and Mike Bro and some others on our creative teams have put together some of the most creative services we've had in a long time around here. And I bless them for it. And every time I see them do it, it fires me up. And it just reminds me how important it is for all of us to do our best in this regard. Let me just give you one more example of this, because it just shows you how a little effort can touch a life. Mike Bro got up to do a teaching out of the book of Colossians, where he was saying that in the power of Christ, you can take off, the old life, and you can put on the new life. And he did the teaching, and while he was doing the teaching, he walked behind a black screen. It was a little bit further back on stage than that bench is that you're looking at right there. But he went back behind the screen, and he was talking about taking off lust and taking off this and taking off that. And he was actually throwing clothes over the top of this screen as though he was undressing back there. Don't even think about that. But anyway, after he did a bunch of that very visual stuff, take off this, take off this, take off this, he walked out in a suit. Our congregation has known Mike for 2.5 years, never seen him in a suit. And he walked out in a brand new suit and said, you can be a new man. You can put on new stuff with the power of Christ. And everyone applauded and so. And a friend of my son's talked to me a couple days after that. This is so interesting. He's just on the beginning edge of his spiritual journey. And I said, how'd you like New Community this week? And the guy says to me, you know what I realized? With the power of God, I can take off the anger that has been wrecking my life. I can take off anger. I never realized I could take off anger. Now, most people would have just taught that passage and not gone the extra mile to make it illustrative, to give a visual. Friends, I plead with you, make your meetings memorable. Okay? Okay, last one. Number 4, from the deathbed, here we go. Keep the vision clear, keep the people engaged, make the gatherings memorable. Finally, pace yourself for the long haul. Leader, pace yourself for the long haul. The key verse here is 1 Corinthians 9:25. Just repeat only the words that I give you now. Run in such a way as to win the prize. Run in such a way as to win the prize. This summer I read a book that redefined physical endurance for me. The book is called The Ultra Marathon Man. Have any of you seen this book? The Ultra Marathon Man. It's about a guy who decided to see how far he could run. He had been a runner in high school, and now he was an older guy, and he decided to see how far he could run. So he signed up for some 5Ks. They almost killed him. But eventually he got to where he could run a 5K and then a 10K. Soon he signed up for a full marathon. Again, it was very ugly, his first marathon, but he wound up training and being able to do it. Then he found an event called the Western States 100. What do you think the 100 represents? 100 miles. Not 100 kilometers for you foreign wimps, but 100 miles. I'm trained in cross-cultural endearment. But anyway, to run in the 100-mile run, the Western States 100-mile run, you had to first prove that you were likely to be able to do it, so you had to run 50 miles in less than 9 hours. And this, again, almost killed this guy. But he eventually finished that qualifying run, and then he entered in the Western 100-mile race. And the description of what he had to do to finish that race is worth the price of the book. He wasn't done pushing the limits yet. He learned of a 200-mile relay race where every 5.5 miles, a new team member would take a baton. It was a 200-mile relay race, and the idea came to him, what if I enter that race solo, like do no handoffs, 200 miles? And everyone thought, you gotta be kidding me. Well, long story short, he entered the race, and it was very ugly. But he finished a 200-mile run. The final challenge, captured on the final pages of the book, I'm giving it to you straight. The guy signs up the following year for another one of these 200-mile runs, relay, but he's not going to hand the baton to anyone. He's going to do all 200 miles. And he timed it so that upon completion of the 200-mile run, he would walk over a few steps and begin a full marathon. Now, you can question his brain power. But he's a runner. And I've been running for over 25 years, and I know a little bit about the disciplines, the mental and physical toughness involved in distance running. And I mean, I read that book, and it just redefined physical endurance for me. I was so inspired, I added about 40 yards to my regular 4-mile run. It nearly killed me, really. But what I want to spend these final few moments talking to you about is another kind of marathon race, and that's the leader's race, the ministry race, the race to carry out the calling of God on your life. And Paul says, you got to run the race in such a way so as to win the prize. You got to run in such a way so as to win the prize. Most of you know that distance running, if you intend to win any long distance events, it's all about pacing. If you start a race with too fast a pace, there's a high likelihood you'll never finish. If you run too slowly, there's not much of a chance you'll win. So great runners work very hard on establishing their own individual absolute best pace. It's all about pacing. I told you in October, I'll be celebrating 30 years of being the senior pastor here at Willow. And again, just a little window into my life. This is a big, honking deal for me. It isn't for other pastors necessarily, but it is for me. I'm going to savor this I'm going to celebrate this. Our family is doing a thing that we'll remember the rest of our lives. This is one of the biggest achievements of my life, and I'll tell you why. Because I never thought I'd make it. I started the ministry race with no attention to pace. I ran the first 15 years way, way, way too fast. And some of you know I hit a wall at the 15-year mark. I mean, I was so spent and cramped up and worn down, heavy, puking, heaving, puking, you know. I hurt myself so badly by running too fast that I never thought I'd get to run again. And I've told this publicly before. It took almost 4 years between 1990 and 1994 for me to heal up on the inside of my life and begin to feel any sense of normalcy in my life. 4 years of limping in my leadership here, 4 years of Christian counseling, 4 years of leaning into family and friends, and 4 years of facing what motivated me to run too fast. What was fueling that running too fast? I look back, I did not run the race in such a way as to establish a sustainable pace, one that maybe would lead me to the victory circle at the end of the race someday. Fellow leaders, you know who you are. Some of you are just plain running too fast. You're starting to cramp up. You're a little lightheaded, queasy in the stomach. Let me get even more personal than that. Some of you, since you've been here and had a little time to reflect, you've listened to the other speakers here at the summit, you know deep down that you've been running so fast that the damage has already been registered. The damage has started to occur in your soul. It's occurred in your marriage and with your kids. It's occurring with your staff. But see, the thing that happens is you realize you have to keep running this fast or all that you've built is going to crash down upon you. That's why I kept running. I didn't know a way not to run. I felt I had to sustain that frantic pace because how was I going to keep all of these plates spinning and all these balls in the air? And what was I going to quit after 15 years? And I was just running too fast and didn't know how to get off the treadmill. And I've been there, so if some of you are in that spot right now, I know how terrifying it is. You have this sense of accumulated exhaustion, and the thought of slowing down and facing all this and dealing with all this and maybe risking all this is just overwhelming to you. So something inside you just says, well, then just keep on running. Pray for the rapture, you know. But I just want to give you one little idea about this. I hope you'll take me to heart. This is what Henry Cloud was talking a little bit about yesterday. Would you be graceful with yourself? Would you give yourself a little grace? Would you give yourself grace enough to take a time out? Just take a time out. You don't have to quit the race entirely. You don't have to blow up your life's work. You don't have to check into a nut house. Just take a time out. This ultra marathon runner whose book I was just describing to you, in these 200-mile races, he ran with a support van next to him. And sometimes when he had misjudged his pace, or if he had not eaten enough or had enough to drink, he would have to take a time out, and he would crawl into that van and lay down and rest and recuperate. And then he would reflect on why he had gotten himself into that depleted condition. And then when he got himself squared away, he would re-enter the race, but he was a little wiser at that point for the next leg of the race. Some of us need to take a time out and crawl in a van and reflect and heal up and get some attention paid to us and get some conversations going with friends or Christian counselors or whatever to be able to re-enter the race after a week or a month or whatever, so that we can run in such a way that we will be able to finish the race and maybe even win the prize. But as I'm nearing my 30-year mark, I do so with such a humbling awareness of God's protective grace in my life. I owe so many people such huge debts of gratitude for helping me through that 4-year period of my life. There were elders in this church who took a risk of us going to team teaching when no one even knew what the word meant. We went to team leadership when that was not widely used in the kingdom. They were gracious with summer study breaks that helped me get my head back on straight and get my family around me. There are people who were friends who opened up their hearts and homes and financial support to us in those days so that we could heal up and so. And I don't have any illusions about getting some big prize at the end of my life. My race hasn't been all that admirable in many ways, but I am increasingly committed to finishing the thing, and with God's help, to finishing it well, finishing it with my integrity intact, and finishing it with a sweet spirit and a heart that can still be surprised by God and filled with wonder once in a while. I'd like to finish it with a family that loves to be together and be around me, and with friends that I can belly laugh with and sailboat race with, and finishing it so that I can stand in front of the one who finished his race, as we were reminded earlier, Jesus Christ, who had the toughest assignment of all, and he finished his. And I want to stand in front of that finisher, the one who said, "It is finished for my sins," and I want to say, well, at least I finished mine too. Leaders, how can I say it? We need you. The local church is the hope of the world, and its future rests primarily in the hands of its leaders. Leaders are critical to churches reaching their redemptive potential. We can't lose a one of you from your race. So I plead with you, pace yourself for the long haul. Pay attention to the stuff Jack Groppel was talking to you about and Henry was talking to you about. Take a time out, figure this stuff out so that you can be in it for the long haul. Our time is quickly escaping, but I want to end our time together by reflecting on an event that I was privileged to participate in recently. There's a pastor friend of mine who just celebrated his 50th year of being a senior pastor. 50 years. So I was invited out, and I had the opportunity to say some words to his flock. And I said some words that conferred some value on him, I think. And then he got up after I got up, and the church was applauding him and cheering him on. And he turned as he was going to walk off the stage, and he said to his congregation and to me, I was sitting up on the stage, he said, "Hey, I still remember exactly where I was when God called me into the ministry. I was just a young boy in a country church singing a hymn." And a bunch of people laughed and so. And he said, that's what it was. I was just singing a hymn in a country church. And he said, "You want to know what the hymn was?" And we were all kind of kidding him and so. And he said, "I'll not only tell you what the hymn was, I'll recite all 4 verses." And I thought, well, this is going to be good. So he turns to his church, he closes his eyes. I'll never forget this as long as I live. This white-haired older pastor, now soon to be in his 80s, he's standing there in front of his church, he closes his eyes, and he says by memory these words that I'll read to you. "I love thy church, O Lord, the house of thine abode, the church our blessed Redeemer saved with his own precious blood. I love thy church, O Lord, her walls before thee stand, dear as the apple of thine eye engraven on thy hand. Beyond my highest joys, I prize her heavenly ways, her sweet communion, solemn vows, her hymns of love and praise." And I love this last verse. I really love this last verse. "For her my tears shall fall, for her my prayers ascend. To her my cares and toils be given, till toils and cares shall end." To her my cares and toils be given, till toils and cares shall end. I lost it right there on the stage, looking at this guy who had been faithful for 50 years, had given his guts for the church that God loves and calls his bride. I want to give every day of what's left of the rest of my life to that church. I don't shrink back one bit, asking every single one of you to give every day of what's left of the rest of your life to the church that our blessed Redeemer saved with his own precious blood, the hope of the world.